interesting discussion. Uh, we have about 20 plus audience, so I won't go into introduction. I'll just come in, and when we have the question answer session, I would request you to just introduce yourself as you ask the question. I hope my voice is clear, or do I have to speak louder?
We can hear you, Sami sir.
So we can go to the next slide. I've just done a bit of a historical analysis of the policy, but done more of the dynamics part. So the purpose is that I'll try to give an overview of the key issues of policy, planning, implementation, and results, because it's a very vast subject, and just dealing with it in a short time is not easy. So what I've tried to do in this presentation is give you an overview, identified some of the macro level causes apart from the results. And then I'd initially thought of a 45-minute presentation. I tried to finish in 35 minutes and leave the rest of the time for a discussion. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so there are many ways of defining what education is. Objective from reading about education over the years is basically that every child learns to become a self-learner, to explore the potentials of life to the fullest. So basically, each individual is born with a potential. A good education system helps the child or the individual explore that potential to the fullest. In simpler words, in more bureaucratic words, it says the purpose of any education policy is quality education for all. The quality, of course, being the definition part of what quality means. We'll be going into that. We'll go to the next slide, please. And if I'm too fast, do stop me. So what should education policies target? If you see, right in the middle is the child. The benchmark for any education policy, plan, implementation process is very simple. Will the child benefit? Has the child benefited in terms of education? And if the child has not benefited, then we are off the target. We need to do something more or something different. And what exactly is it that in terms of quality you're trying to focus on? Number one, in the top left-hand corner, that's my top left-hand corner, is critical analytic ability. The ability to think, to be critical, to break up things into smaller parts, to think for himself or herself. The second part on the right is values. Now, values are very subjective and jurisdiction specific, but whatever they are, they need to go in through that education system. And eventually, the target is that the child becomes a self-learner. Now, what I have in the dotted oval there is strong literacy and numeracy skills. I pulled it out because that's what differentiates an educated person with the ability to read, have strong reading comprehension, from a person who can otherwise be very analytical but does not have that ability. So basically the invention of writing, the invention of printing has ensured that if somebody has strong literacy and numeracy skills with critical analytical ability, then the lifelong learning process starts. Then on the outer bracket on the left-hand side, we are saying inclusive and equity. So all of this for every child. Every child. Pakistan also has this compulsory education as a fundamental right under the constitution, and every province has a law to promulgate that. So theoretically, on paper, we have that law that every child needs to be included, irrespective of gender, irrespective of poverty. And then at the end of the other bracket, you see prepare the child for life and livelihood. So when you do all that, you prepare every child for life and livelihood. So it's not just livelihood, because you cope with life. You cope with life beyond your livelihood, you cope with life within your livelihood. So that's what an education system is supposed to do and what a good quality education would provide to a child. That's why I said the ability to fully explore an individual's potential. We can go to the next one. Now, I specifically pulled out learning. And this is a problem that we had developed, a diagram that we had developed when we were working on the Balochistan Education Sector Plan. And we sort of broke it into where does the learning take place. Now, learning, remember, takes place in the classroom. So when we're talking of quality and we're not looking at what is in the classroom, we miss our target. At the center, what I have put in are three things: reading, numeracy, and analytical ability. These are the three weakest links among children in Pakistan. There is a lot of data out there which will tell you that, some of which I have shared here just as an overview. If you're interested, you can go into data of ASAR. You can look at data of the National Education Assessment System. Children cannot read. Grade 5 children cannot read at the basic level. Children do not have analytical ability. And now what happens is, what causes this weakness? Number one is the child health and welfare. So the child coming into the room, into the classroom, is bringing a lot of baggage. Now that baggage can be positive, that baggage can be negative. So what malnutrition is one of the things. I was part of a study where we interviewed about 1,200 teachers across the country, and many of them responded that after the first 30 minutes, we lose the child because the child has not had breakfast. Now, these are children in the poorest schools, which is the majority. Children may be coming in with acute diseases, maybe having issues of hygiene. We have a high problem of stunting. So we don't even know when the child comes in, what type of endowments the child brings in. So we have to target that also as a remedial approach to make sure that there's some degree of equity and eventually equality. The next is the teaching learning process, the ability of the teachers, the motivation of the teachers, the availability of teachers, what type of classroom practices do they undertake, can they assess a child's progress or they cannot assess a child's progress. Now, I'll just explain one point here before moving to the next curriculum framework. Teacher is part of an organization. So a lot of time when we talk about teachers, there's the discussion somehow floats into a zone where there's an understanding as if teachers are independent actors. Teachers are not independent actors. They're employees of the education department or wherever they are working. So their performance is actually a reflection of the organization as a whole. So a lot of things when we talk of motivation and availability, that has a lot to do with the way an organization treats its employees, including teachers. And finally, coming to the learning design, that is the most critical one. It is the most ignored area. I would say at par with child health and welfare, but in case of learning design, which consists of a curriculum framework, which tells you what a curriculum is supposed to do, where do we want to take the child, how would we design our curriculum, what would be the objectives. Then the scheme of studies, which sort of breaks up your curriculum into X number of hours, days, months into 1 year. Then the curriculum itself, and then the textbooks. And there are major flaws here, which we'll be discussing. If you have to look at all three to make sure that you target the child's learning improvement. Weakness in any one of these will create a gap. And as I said, a lot of times in our discussions in Pakistan, teacher is targeted, but the other two circles that you see there are completely missed. In case of curriculum, we assume that everything is fine. For child health and welfare, we do not even begin to recognize that the child going into the classroom needs to be looked after, and the issues of that child need to be considered in any learning process. We can go to the next one. So how to approach improvements? There's a value chain for learning approach that we sometimes use. I mean, I have used it with my team in some of the documents that I've worked on. You start with the curriculum. You can even start with a curriculum framework, but I start with the curriculum, which gets converted first into teaching and learning material, which is the textbooks or any supplementary material. Then curriculum is the document on which you train the teacher. In Pakistan, a lot of times the teachers have not even seen the curriculum. Then you go on to assessments. Now, teacher assessment also has to be as per the curriculum. And if we were to go into a more detailed discussion, even the examinations taken by our boards of examination, they are not, I won't say they're not congruent with the curriculum, but they do not fully do justice to the curriculum. And then, of course, teaching in the classroom has to be primarily based on what the curriculum's requirements are. We have a very heavy textbook dependence, and there are gaps in converting a curriculum into textbooks, which can again be part of the discussion. And eventually, everything targets the learner and learning. But if you see at the top, all of this is possible in making change if the system has capacity. And when I say system has capacity, then there are multiple areas that we'll be talking about, not just the teacher. Whatever goes behind, whatever from outside the classroom goes into the classroom, and some sort of standardization. What are the minimum standards that we are expecting? So this completes the value chain. And as we go further, we'll see how much of it is followed in Pakistan, what are the issues. You can go to the next slide. Okay, I've just listed these policies for your reference. I don't have the time to go into the details of each one, but you see from 1947 to 2017, we have about 12 documents which are either policies or policy equivalents. So you had a first education conference report in December 1947, then 51. The most comprehensive report that is seen as the most comprehensive report to date is the 1959 Sharif Commission report. And the latest document is the 2017 National Education Policy. Before the 2009 education policy, there was a white paper on education also, which I have not put here because that was a diagnostic document. So that did the diagnostic on which the 2009 policy was based. And since 2008, we've had various sector plans also. We've had sector plans in Punjab. The second one has just been approved in Sindh. I think the second one has been approved in Punjab and Balochistan also. The one in KP is almost near completion. So we'll discuss a bit of what's happening there also. So we have so many policy and planning documents over the years. So we'll see why, we still have these gaps after all these years. We'll go to the next one. Now, where are we after 72 years? Literacy rate 10 plus overall is 60. Now, in 1951, we had our first population census, and the literacy rate at that time was 11, based on whatever the definition of the time was. So if you add 72 years, so it's not even 1% per year. The male 10 plus is 71 and the female is 49. The presentation that I'll eventually share with everyone will have the source available on the slide. This is from PSLM 2018-19. Net enrollment rate at secondary. Net enrollment rate, for those of you who are not familiar, is the number of students of a given age in school divided by the total number of that age group in the population. So nationally, our figure for net enrollment rate at secondary is 27. So even if you were to assume that 10% children were not in the right age cohort, the general estimate is that anywhere from 60% to 80% of the children are out of school by the time we reach the secondary level, which is grades 9 and 10. And we continue to lose even more at intermediate and the university levels. Literacy and numeracy skills. Now, this is from ASR. 41%, now this is, I think, ASR 2019. 41% of grade 5 children cannot read a story in basic languages like Urdu, Pashto, and Sindhi. This is just an indicator. It doesn't mean that the rest of the 59% are doing very well. And this is something that, according to the curriculum, should be accomplished by grade 2. And also remember that by grade 5, we've already lost, depending on the province, about 30% to 50% of the children. According to the 2018-19 PSLM, 30% children age 5 to 16 are out of school. And I was trying to find if they have the pyramid for level-wise. They did not have it, but from past data that I've seen, the maximum number of out-of-school children actually are post-middle. So it continues to increase as you go from primary to middle to secondary level. Go to the next one. Now, this I actually pulled out from the report of the Federal Public Service Commission. Unfortunately, we do not have these reports available for a lot of other potential employees. But since the Federal Public Service Commission employs 100 plus individuals with high aspirations and normally good outcomes in their education, I mean, I would say they are the success stories of a system which loses 80% by grade 10. And what the examination report tells you is not very encouraging. So this is for 2016 and 17. Level of general knowledge was low and candidates in general had poor understanding of literacy, literary sense, criticism, or comprehension. If you look at data for the last 8-10 years, normally 2% to 3% candidates pass the written exam. I've qualified CSS many years ago, and I can tell you it's not that tough to qualify the written. It's just that the standard of education has really gone down. There are other reports of the past years. If you go through sometimes the FPSC website, they'll tell you that one of the problems is critical analytical ability. So we can go to the next one. Now, this is one of the problems that I wanted to highlight. You remember that earlier slide where I said the child coming into the system. Now, among many other problems, a lot of problems which are not documented about early child, a lot of data that is missing for a child from birth to age 5, except for some health data from Pakistan Demographic and Health Survey. But this one, stunting, is extremely critical because stunting, if not reversed by age 2, becomes irreversible and has a serious implication on the cognitive ability of the child, which means that if it is not reversed, the child's ability to develop critical analytical approaches will be limited. So even if you have the best design, the best teacher, but the child is already stunted, you probably lost the child. There's very minimal you can do with the child. And if you look at the figure, they're quite worrying. Punjab has the lowest at 30%. So 30% children under 5 in Punjab have some degree of stunting. Balochistan, 47%, Sindh, 50%. Quetta, which is now part of KP, is 52%. And Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, 40%. Gilgit-Baltistan, 47%. So this is huge chunk of children that you lose theoretically even before they join school. I've seen children in classroom, it's just a few months back. And one of the child, and then I was going to ask her a question, and the teacher said, don't worry about her, she doesn't understand anything. And then she was one of the victims of this stunting. You can go to the next one. So what went wrong? I mean, if you look at the data, after 72 years, one would expect better. Learning crisis is the biggest crisis we have, and I personally believe that a lot of dropouts are because of the poor quality. Parents make very rational decisions. Their aspirations based on what they see are very low, so that leads to a lot of dropouts. So we'll analyze it at 3 levels: policy, planning, and implementation. Let's go to the next one. So the first one, policies with the exception of 1959 and 2009, I would even add 72, I don't know why I didn't add it here, have focused more on the ideological than pedagogy and learning. So it's a lot of policy debate in Pakistan gets sucked in by the ideological, and I'll come to this again. The assumptions of governance being functional was first challenged in 2009. In fact, the reason was that the governance declined actually based on my own work in the field from what I've been asking people is basically it started somewhere in the 70s and it continued till the late 90s. And it was only in 2009 that the policy for the first time recognized it as an issue. Otherwise, there was an assumption that everything is fine. You just need to change textbooks or, a bit of teacher training and everything will work. The 2009 policy identified governance as an issue. We've had high doses of ideological shifts. The 1972 policy was close to what you would call close to the People's Party's more secular ideology at the time. 79, 92, 98 had heavy doses of Islamization or religiosity, depends on how you want to look at it. Because 79 was when General Zia took over, and that was the first policy, and the process continued. There was a very weak attempt at neutralization in 2009. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer, because this is from my own memory. I was part of this. But more importantly, over time, policies lost their efficacy as documents taken seriously by the governments. So basically, these are documents which lie on the shelves. If you look at the 1959 policy, you can actually, if you go through the history, a lot of it was actually implemented on ground. But in the last 20, 25 years, I know that most of the policies just lie on the shelf. Beyond, what is politically convenient. Somebody wants to push an agenda, uses the policy, puts it through, or anything that is perceived as such. Then the other thing is donor influence. So the last 20 years, a lot of donor influence has come in, and it has crowded out the importance of our own national policies. And I can give you examples in case somebody has a question. And the donors also use these policies very selectively. So something that aligns with their agenda, they'll say, okay, this is also in your national policy, you need to prioritize this. There's no structured process of prioritization by the system internally. So a lot of issues, examples that I'm giving you, donor influence combined with whimsical demands. There's a lot of whimsical demands of political leadership sometimes comes in without a clear understanding of the rationale of why you need to do this. So the language issue, extremely mishandled in Pakistan and a very central cause of the poor learning. Danish School is an example of low priority, the wrong priority, I would say. We put in a lot of stuff into missing facilities, teacher absenteeism, and we did achieve results, but it did not change what was happening inside the classroom. Serious research has never been valued, and you cannot have an education system which is not prepared to learn. There's research going on, but since it is not valued, it remains either in universities or it remains on the periphery. Very rarely is research used, and that's one of the reasons we just keep on attempting stuff without actually getting some sort of an empirical evidence of what's going on ground. We go to the next one. Practical planning is disconnected from policy. So how planning takes place is, you have these PC1 processes. So on the one hand, depending on which province you are in, what type of political influence can be brought in, because it's very expedient and useful to have a school in your area, both financially and politically, because somebody is going to get a contract, somebody's going to get a kickback. So a lot of construction heavy development work. I'm not saying it's entirely like that. In the last few years, in some couple of provinces at least, there's been some money allocated for teacher training also, but by and large, it's a traditional PC1 process of the government where you pick up a project, you do not connect it to the sector plans. And the other thing that actually happens in terms of planning and gets implemented are donor projects. Now, there are good donor projects, there are not so good donor projects. It depends on how you evaluate the whole system. To what extent does the government evaluate? To what extent does the government have the capacity to evaluate the priorities? There's a lot of question marks. There are a lot of question marks there. And again, in the last 20 years, the wrong donor priorities have created a lot of problems. The sector plans. Now, the sector plans were created as plans which were supposed to regulate the entire development project into a set of priorities, development work into a set of priorities. But unfortunately, like the education policy, the sector plans have also been more or less lying on the shelves. Again, it might vary from province to province, but by and large, that's what has happened. And the political expediency or donor priorities have overtaken. It remains a sort of a gray zone, which is still evolving. So let's see what happens with the new sector plans. We'll go to the next one, please. I've already explained the first part. I think this I've already explained. So we can go to the, except for the last point, the classroom realities are missing. So if I just come to the last point, for example, provision of free textbooks was, a lot of money was spent on provision of free textbooks. And a lot of resources, human resource was employed in that. But what got missed in these last 20 years, where I feel there was more political support to education than it was, than if I compare it from the 80s and 90s. But we missed the bus because classroom realities are missing. We're not looking at what happens inside the classroom, where the real learning or lack of it is the issue. Go to the next one, please. So what are the classroom realities? So some of which I've already explained. You know, majority of students come from poor households, whether they are low-cost private schools, whether they're government schools. Government schools have the poorest of the poor. We've already seen that more than 40% children overall nationally are stunted. Parents are either poorly educated or illiterate, and you have to consider that when you are developing a curriculum. You see, if you have certain expectations from a child, then you have to also have an understanding of the household to which the child belongs. And we have diverse language endowments. In a majority of cases, a mother tongue that the child speaks is other than Urdu. Forget English, you know, and this language issue creates the first block in learning, and that's where, you know, a lot of students, we lose a lot of students. Teachers, well, over the year, there has been improvement in the merit. So as I said, in the last 20 years, we have seen some improvements also. One of the areas where we've seen improvement is merit in recruitment of teachers in all the provinces with varying degrees. But some of the past deadwoods still exist. In the 80s and 90s, starting from the 70s, you know, you could just get a letter from an MPA and get recruited as a teacher. It was as simple as that. But from 2000 onwards, in fact, late 90s in Punjab and then in the other provinces around 2008-10 onwards, this recruitment process improved. However, even those teachers come from weak teacher training system. The teacher training system is another weak link. But not all teachers are bad. They try against odds. I told you that, you know, our learning design does not fit into the classroom, and I'll explain that a bit more later. So there are good teachers in the system by sheer law of averages. You know, if you have 300,000 or 400,000 teachers in Punjab, it's not possible that all are bad. But why is everyone failing? And then there is a morale issue there. You know, they are the ones who are always targeted for failure. Nobody looks at, you know, what type of endowments they have been given, what type of situation they have been given. And they have very little voice in policy and planning. You know, they are the individuals who are sitting right there on the front line, dealing with the issues in the classroom, and their voice doesn't come into policy and planning, and they have to just accept whatever comes from the top. Mine is the associations, because there are teachers associations, but they have their own politics and issues. Unfortunately, unlike what you would expect from a professional organization, they do not go into the real issues of learning or the child. They have their own salary or transfer posting issues which are prioritized. Sorry about this, I have to. Okay, so we can go to the next one. I'm in the classroom. If you go, some of the other, I hope everybody can hear me, because I'm getting a message that my net is not stable. So, I mean, construction is not weather friendly. I mean, I'm just going to the very basics. A yellow building of a school in Tharparkar, which in summers is like an oven, is the same building that you will find in a very cold place somewhere in northern Balochistan. So it's a standard size. You know, not even looking at weather friendliness. There are many classes, schools which are just a single room. You'll find many in Sindh, many in Balochistan, just a single room, sometimes even shelterless. Simple issues like mismatch of facilities of student strength. You have 200 students, 2 washrooms. So you tick off, okay, the missing facilities are there, the school has 2 washrooms. But there's just 200 students. There's a high prevalence of corporal punishment. There have been efforts over the years, they have not helped, and corporal punishment is extremely counterproductive to personality development, child development, learning. I mean, it does more damage. I sometimes, very cynically, when in the past few months we had no school because of the COVID situation, and somebody asked my opinion, I said, to be cynical, I'm glad we have no school. At least the children are safe from this corporal punishment. They were not learning anything anyway. I'm sorry, that's a very cynical statement, but was just one way of venting things. Even cases of sexual abuse, it's a blind area. We have some NGOs who have collected data of prevalence of child sexual abuse inside the school premises, where teachers are the perpetrators. There's a lot of anecdotal stuff out there. It's a blind area. Nobody wants to talk about it. So what are you doing to the child? On the one hand, the child is not learning, but what type of damage are you doing? And then, of course, there's rote learning in the classroom. Then there's student absenteeism, sometimes encouraged by teachers because they have too many students to take care of. Multi-grade teaching. One teacher, 5 classes, so they tell 2 classes not to come for 2 days a week. Then the other 2 come. So they sort of create this rota, and there's a lot of student absenteeism. Again, I would say varying from province to province, but the problem exists. So we can go to the next one. Now, this to me is a problem which actually, with a bit of focus by the right people, can solve a lot of problems. Textbooks are based on centrally developed curricula. We don't even have an idea of the language diversity of the child. We expect everybody to learn English from day one. Language cannot be learned by simply presenting a book to somebody one fine day of a language the child has not spoken for 4 or 5 early years of his or her existence. You build on the child's natural endowments, you meet the child where the child is, and then you take things forward and take the child where you want to take the child. But we have no research. Even available evidence is not used in development of curricula in terms of the diversity. So there's a disconnect between ground reality of the child and the expectations from the child and the teacher in terms of what the curriculum and textbooks want. I can give you so many examples. I wish we had more time. I mean, for example, in Balochistan, there was this textbook which said Ghar. Now, this was a small school, 1-room school somewhere near Kila Saifullah. And the Ghar the picture was bigger than the house that I own. I mean, it's a very small thing, but how do you make the child correlate? There was zebra. I mean, in that part of the world, nobody has seen a zebra. Zara Bakhtar, I don't know how many of you are aware what Zara Bakhtar is. So, this is grade 1 or Kachi. So if the child cannot relate to what is in the textbook, the child cannot learn. I mean, language becomes the first barrier, but so do these type of examples and illustrations and connectivity. So language policy, as I said, it blunts learning, development of critical analytical ability. Language has 4 stages of learning: listening, speaking, reading, writing. You take the child to school one fine day and you expect that the language that the child already speaks, lives in, is ignored, a new language comes in. It not only creates a situation where a child cannot learn the new language, it also suppresses the child's ability to develop some sort of critical thinking. Very simply, and the last part is, You know, syllabus is something which is very mechanical, that in these number of hours, this much syllabus will be covered. Nobody's actually gone down to a classroom and seen how much time does each topic take and what type of time frame do we need. So sometimes good teachers will tell you, we understand that child needs to have critical ability. We need the child to understand the concept. But the problem is that the syllabus is so long that we can either help the child learn or cover the syllabus, because the accountability is course kitna cover kiya. So for me, the learning design is the centerpiece of failure, but it does not receive enough attention, and everybody assumes that mujhe pata hai, I know what a curriculum is. And I can design one because I have worked in Beacon House or I have worked in City School, which is a complete disconnect with the reality of 99% children of this country. We'll go to the next one. So what went wrong continued. Implementation. So we did policy planning. I went a bit in the classroom. So coming back, there's been a deterioration of the technical bureaucracy of education. You know, if you go to the provincial and district directorates, you will not find people who have an understanding of how a child learns. At least not in a majority of cases. The odd case might be despite the system, not because of the system. Go to the curriculum bureaus of each province or the federal government for that matter. You will hardly find anyone who has a specialized degree in a curriculum, has an understanding of how a curriculum needs to be designed in terms of grounding it into the realities. Same is true of textbook organizations. We don't have authors who actually have an understanding of how textbooks need to be developed. Not only that, we're not even testing our textbooks on ground. We don't even recognize the importance of testing, and we just write whatever we think sitting in Lahore, Quetta, Peshawar, Islamabad, Karachi, and we expect the child to learn it because we reflect our own learning experience onto those textbooks and onto that child. If you look at the textbook reviews going on, a lot of times they're just looking at, grammar or conceptual errors. They're not looking at, what type of vocabulary is relevant for that child. How do you graduate that vocabulary? So it's not research based, and it has to be research based. And then there are issues of examination boards. We do not. I think we have about 12 to 16 examination boards in the country. I'd be very surprised if more than one or two have an assessment or an examination expert. I know of many which don't. That's why the whole examination system is rote based. There's a whole taxonomy of learning which has to be built into assessment. It's a very technical area, just like the curriculum. Most of our examiners have absolutely no idea, and the boards don't have a technical arm which has this sort of assessment understanding. Some work was being done in KP. I don't know what happened with the Peshawar board, but they were trying to improve it. But by and large, we don't have experts. We have a serious dearth of education specialists in curriculum and assessments. And similarly, education planners and textbook developers, but primarily if you have curriculum experts and assessment experts, they can cover the rest. And there's an absence of research and use of research, because research is not used, so a low value of research means not a lot of people are interested. And then centralization of powers towards the Secretary of Education. The original design was that the Directorate of Education is the technical arm. The Secretary is managerial oversight. Because of, I don't know what the chicken and egg situation here would be, but what has happened now is because of the extremely weak capacity of this technical arm, a lot of these technical decisions now go towards the secretary, who's a journalist. But unfortunately, compared to that so-called technical person, the journalist still manages to create some sense out of it. In Punjab, they've created a parallel project management unit, which sort of has created a bypass from the technical unit, and that is resourced by senior civil servants and individuals recruited from the market. It's not the best solution possible, but it's a better alternative than that completely failed technical directorate process. And then the issue of politicization. Now, politicization in many ways is, as I said, the teacher recruitment at one time used to be completely without merit. To that extent, politicization has been pushed back to an extent, but transfers, postings, associations, Absenteeism, depending on the province, as I say, Punjab and KP have hardly any absenteeism issue now, but in Sindh and Balochistan, you still find it part of the politicization problem. But then the politicization also goes into curriculum and the ideology concept. So that has also been part of it sort of crowds out, the ideology discussion crowds out the more technical aspects of education. So we can go to the next one. Okay, I'll try to finish it fast. So this is another way of looking at it. I'll just quickly go through it. This is within a federal structure. Before the 18th Amendment, the federal government controlled curriculum, policy planning, and Islamic education through the concurrent legislative list. The concurrent legislative list basically had subjects where both the province and federal government could legislate or have executive functions, but in case of a conflict, the federal component would prevail. So in 1976, there was a Curriculum Act, which shifted the entire powers of curriculum development to the federal government. After the 18th Amendment, these were transferred to the provinces, but practically the federal government has made its way back into curriculum and policy areas. So I'm just, because of paucity of time, I'm not going into details, but if anybody has an interest, I can explain this. We can go to the next one. So what happens? We have this complex that I already explained. The federal government has its own agenda, provincial governments have their own agenda, the development partners have their own agendas. Lately, what I've seen is what gets implemented is more or less what the development partners want in terms of development work. Or, the odd pet project of a chief minister like the Danish schools or something else that may get done. Otherwise, in routine, we have a lot of implementation losses from plan to what actually gets implemented. And then there's as I said, the ideological bounds. The ideological bounds, for example, these are also there in the media. If you go to the next one, please. You see, one is the constitutional stipulations. The Constitution already says that these are the limits within which you can bring your values, which is fine, which is accepted by everyone. But the problem is that there are those political parties on the right wing who would want to push it further. There is another group, there's no political party that I've seen other than Jamaat-e-Islami who actually has some sort of clarity on what the ideological or value system it needs to push into education. There's an accepted political discourse on what is right and what is wrong. Nobody touches it. But then there's the other extreme, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Nayyar and Dr. Parvez Bhutboy, but a lot of their debate is around the ideological, and as I said, it crowds out the technical aspects. I mean, if a system is failing, does it matter what ideological moorings it has? Maybe I'm giving a very extreme statement, but it's just food for thought that if you're not able to teach the child the basic fundamentals, what's the point in going into an ideological debate on a system which is already failing anyway? So can you go to the next one? So where do the provincial implementation losses come in? One is the provincial buy-in. A lot of things get pushed from the federal government to the provinces. Provinces are sometimes forced to accept it, but since there's no buy-in, they're not serious about implementation. As I already said, the capacity of the education bureaucracy, the politics of education, and the failure to use research. If I were to sort of put it down to these four, these would be the four key elements. You can add more to this. Go to the next one, please. As I've already explained, assumptions about curriculum and textbooks, our assumption is curriculum ठीक है, teacher को train करो वो curriculum को पढ़ा दे. But if the curriculum is not relevant to the realities of the child and what the child needs,
नहीं वापस आ गए हैं घर, आ गए हैं वापस घर.
I think somebody needs to. Okay. For a second, I thought there was a question being asked. So curriculum and textbooks, the assumptions about them being fine and the teacher not being able to teach them is something that needs to be questioned. The way the curriculum textbooks are designed right now fail good and bad teachers equally because they do not relate to the ground realities. priorities of influential development partners. We've done a lot of work on missing facilities because somebody from the development world wanted it. We've done a lot of work on teacher absenteeism. You know, the countable short-term gains at the cost of long-term learning improvements. The political ease of tangible numbers, both for the political leadership as well as development partners. And as I said, focus on ideological frames. And the key is absence of child-focused learning in debates in media and political forums. How many times have you actually, maybe if you have, please do educate me, seen a debate in the media where they're actually talking about how a child learns, why a child is not learning, what are the issues of a child? A lot of times it is about कि जी वो स्कूल में गए, इसकी बिल्डिंग टूटी हुई है, इसकी खिड़कियां टूटी हुई हैं, teachers are like this. There's no debate anywhere. I do not find, I mean, it's in a very, very minor corner, specialized areas where sometimes these debates take place outside the purview of the general public. By and large, these debates are not there. And because of which we are always looking at peripheral issues and not the core issues of education. Next one. Okay. I am done. I'm sorry, it's a very detailed subject. I've just tried to give you an overview. So I'll just open it for questions, comments, explanations, anything.
Thank you, Sami Saab. That was a very encyclopedic presentation. And we do have hands already. You mentioned something about an introduction to the fellows. So just for the purposes of your discussion session, we have a lot of enthusiasts when it comes to education policy making. And diverse is the only word that I will use to describe this cohort. So we have amongst us students of undergraduate students, we have MPhil and PhD scholars, then environmental policy के काफ़ी students हैं, urban architecture, engineering, economists. Well, that said, we are also sitting across different cities in Pakistan. And for the rest of you, Abdus Sami Sahab has more than 2.5 decades of experience in policy and planning with the government and has led numerous projects. And recently it was about the Balochistan education sector project that he was involved in. So, and we have fellows from Balochistan as well right now. That said, we'll start with Zaki, followed by Barira, and then more of you can join.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, thank you so much for the comprehensive talk. I just had two brief questions. So, you talked about the accountability part, about how power is very centralized. So we see that in district level, there is not much accountability of the schools or the teachers at the district level. So would you suggest any measure, or there is this, I think in KPK, there has been these school councils consisting of the teachers and parents for the upkeep of schools. Do you think those are effective, or any other measures to basically shorten the accountability chain that exists for the accountability? And the second question pertains to in the one of the slides you talked about that I think there was something about the Danish schools in the donor issue part. Could you elaborate on that? Thank you very much.
Sami Saab, आप mute.
So accountability, before we start talking about which level, yes, it should be decentralized, communities should be involved. That's what theory tells you. But before you actually hold some organization or some system or some individual accountable, you should be clear on what the framework of that accountability is. So my problem starts with the framework of that accountability and the priorities of accountability. For example, as I said, the teachers are asked, "Ji, aapne course kitna cover kiya hai?" It's not about, कि बच्चे ने सीखा क्या है. What has the child learned, and why has the child not learned? And it's a systemic accountability. It's not about the teacher alone. So we've never done that type of accountability. And that is not the type of accountability that you would expect the communities to be able to do because of the general poverty and the general levels of literacy that we have. It has to be some sort of a top-down framework, which in the long run can go down to the districts and school level. But the accountability that we have right now is more about teacher absenteeism. I went to a school in KP a few years back, just by accident. I जाना मैंने किसी और स्कूल था, गलती से स्कूल चला गया, तो it was a high school. So I asked them what was happening. They said, जी teacher absenteeism को बहुत check कर रहे हैं. I said, how many teachers do you have? So he said 23. I said, how many were regularly absent? He said 2. So I said, you're spending so much money on these 2 teachers who are not coming to school, and you're not looking at what is happening to the 21 who actually coming to school regularly, and what type of results they are producing, what type of support they need. So I think it's more about the framework. In principle, yes, it has to be eventually decentralized. But right now, because a lot of things move top down, we first need to set the framework of accountability right. The second question about Danish schools, I think Danish school was an extremely poor project as far as value for money is concerned. You're talking about huge schools, huge grounds, I mean, that money could have been spent in getting curriculum experts into the system. That money could have been spent on researching why children, and that money could have been spent in some sort of teacher training, in developing a human resource for the system, which could in the long run have improved it. So a few Dani schools and the size thinking कि जी इसको HSN बना दें. I'm sorry, that's not how it works, and so that's why I'm very critical of Dani schools as money that could have been used much better with much broader results.
Thank you, Sami Saab. Barira, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I had 2 brief questions. First of all, do you think that I wanted to take your point on single national curriculum, that can it help in creating equality in schools? And second, if we start that Pakistan has different provinces with different languages. If we start teaching kids their province language, for example, from class 1 to class 5, if the children are taught in Sindhi in Karachi and on all those places, and Punjabi in Punjab maybe, or Urdu, so do you think that it will help students develop cognitive ability, and it will be easier for them to understand concepts more well, because the parents at home will be speaking Sindhi, Urdu, or Punjabi, whichever province the child belongs to. So do you think it will help in developing cognitive abilities?
I think I'll start with your second question first. We all saw what happened in Washington, D.C. a few days back on 6th January when a mob was attacking Capitol Hill. Somebody developed a very interesting meme, and he said, "Inko kya hua? Inko to saro ko Angrezi bhi aati hai." So somehow in Pakistan, we have developed this very strange notion of relating English with intelligence, English with education. And education is, as you said, it is critical analytical ability. And critical analytical ability can best be developed when a child is not stressed into learning a new language when the child enters school, especially if the child is from a monolingual environment, which is the majority of children in this country. You can once, and what the research tells you, if a child develops literacy skills well in the first language, the child will transfer those skills to the next language easily. So the longer you teach the child in the mother tongue, the deeper you take the child in the mother tongue, the better the child will transit to the next language. I mean, you are speaking English. If tomorrow, I don't know whether you know French or not, but tomorrow if you are asked to learn French, you know that what are the fundamentals of a language. You see, it's very easy for us to talk about a written script now that we have grown up with it. But imagine a child of 4 or 5 years who doesn't know what script is, and for the first time you're introducing script, which is an abstract concept. Even in the language that the child knows, it's a complex process. When you do it in a language that the child doesn't speak, doesn't listen to at home, it's a non-starter. So it's completely blunts the learning process, it suppresses the cognitive development, and that is exactly why I think the single national curriculum is a bad idea. They're saying uniform curriculum. Uniform is not the solution in a diverse country. There's a difference between equity and uniformity. You need to create situation where things become equitable, and they can become equitable only if you recognize that diversity and cater to that diversity, especially in early years of the child's learning. You can have a minimal standard by grade 12, but not every child will reach that standard through the same path. So somebody who has English at home can start with English from grade 1, but that would be a very small minority in this country. For most, it has to be the language, not just the language. I gave you a few examples like, Zara Bakhtar. I can still ask again, anybody who knows what Zara Bakhtar means, please raise your hand. Anyone?
उमर ने हाथ खड़ा किया जी उमर आप बताएं
I can.
क्या मतलब जी सॉरी किसने हाथ खड़ा किया
उमर फारूक जी उमर
हम ये अक्सर ये पुलिस की जिस वक्त हो रही होती है कोई डिबेट तो जरा बख्तर गाड़ियां वो जो के मजबूत होती हैं
जरा बख्तर इज आर्मर सो वो आर्मर्ड कार्स होती है तो उनको जरा बख्तर बट ओरिजिनल वर्ड कम्स फ्रॉम द आर्मर दैट एंशिएंट सोल्जर्स यूज्ड टू वेयर नाउ लोरा लाइन में 5 साल के बच्चे को पहले तो उर्दू आती नहीं उसको आप पढ़ा रहे हैं जरा बख्तर उसको आप दिखाएंगे किधर you see you move from familiar to non-familiar so when you talk of a single national curriculum you are just killing the process for that diversity so language being a very critical subset of that single national curriculum but overall also I mean I can go into a lot of details of the single national curriculum where I can tell you that it has been developed in a way where a lot of people who have developed the curriculum have not even seen the diversity and issues of schools in this country. हमें छोटा सा एग्जांपल है कि जी आप एक एग्जांपल एक सब्जेक्ट में दिया हुआ है कि बच्चे लंच शेयर करें एक दूसरे के साथ 90% of children in these schools do not bring lunch to school. Many of them have not even had breakfast. So I'm just giving you a very small example. If you go into details, I can give you much more examples, many more examples. You need to cater to diversity and a single national curriculum, single set of national standards one can understand, but that too by grade 12. But single national curriculum, it will only add to the problems.
Thank you, Sami Saab. Seher, हम आपका सवाल लेंगे, but before that, I have a question on behalf of one of our fellows. She is based in Balochistan. और उनका सवाल है that what is your opinion about the long distances between schools and the community in Balochistan? Some schools are also established in areas where communities do not exist. Do you think that this is the role of the federal government, which identifies these things through a map, which identified these things through a map before the 18th Amendment? And why is there no policy for teachers' well-being and personal problems? Like mostly training is focused on professional trainings only. So if you could comment on that.
Okay, so first of all, I am a critic of federal government generally. These are not areas which were in the purview of the federal government ever. School construction, teacher welfare was always a provincial subject in education. Federal government was linked with overall policy and curriculum. In Balochistan, the challenge is very different from other provinces, firstly because of low population density. And unfortunately, the formula for school construction that is used in KP, Sindh and Punjab is also used in Balochistan, which is X% number of population in a certain radius. अभी बलोचिस्तान में उस रेडियस में आपको कई जगह पे you won't find any people. There are hamlets of 6 to 8 houses sometimes. So Balochistan always needed a solution of schooling which at least which would be more which would cater to the low population density, which cannot be a replica of what Punjab and Sindh and KP with higher population densities have. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is the extreme politicization within the provincial politics of school building. Kyun? There is corruption. School construction में problem आता है. There's been an analysis done by the Planning and Development Department of Balochistan of their development expenditure on schools of the last few years, and they've seen it's overwhelmingly construction, and the results have not improved. So what happens is feasibility is secondary to political priority. So the first part is the rule needs to be changed, and the second part is that the feasibility has to take priority over the political considerations or the political corruption, I would say at times. So I hope that there was no other part of the question. So I would not blame the federal government for that, but I can blame the federal government for a lot of other things, but not this.
Thank you, Sami Saab. So I hope her question is answered. We'll move to Seher और फिर Seher के बाद Maruf.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, I have a question about engagement of parents. Like there have been a lot of enrollment drives, there have been a lot of efforts to convince parents, but I believe that we fall short on that ground because parents have a crucial role to play in sending children to school and in their education, because without their support, I don't think teachers or even the government can do anything. So how do we convince parents? What do you think would be a good strategy to convince them to send their children to school and to support them throughout their educational careers?
I think parents are not the main problem. Parents make a rational decision. You see, parents see a school and they see two generations coming out of the school and going nowhere in life. So they decide, why waste time of my child? Wo 5-6 classes karta usko kehte hain, let's pull him out or pull her out. If a girl child is there, she's either put to household work or they marry her off, or if it's a boy, then put him into some productive work, because the quality of learning is so poor that, with some exceptions, and I'll explain to you what those exceptions are, majority of children end up with some sort of blunting of critical analytical ability, failure to learn any language at a level where they can be useful, where that skill can be useful in an employment. So parents are making a very rational decision in majority of cases. There might be some marginal cases still who may not be sending their children for some reasons, but by and large, my own experience, whether it is Balochistan, whether it is FATA, the trend has changed over the years. Even parents are prepared to send girls to school, provided there are safety issues, security issues, which everywhere in the world are critical issues. So the demand side problem is overrated. The main problem is on the supply side. Balochistan ka humne ek data uthaya. From 2000 to 2015, the number of high schools for girls increased by 100%. The enrollment also increased by 100%. So once there was a school, parents were sending their daughters to school. So the problem is not with the parents. The problem is on the demand side. Unless we can make education meaningful for the child in his or her life and livelihood, parents will continue to have a low opinion. I'll just give one example. Why has the private sector expanded so rapidly in the last 20 years? Because parents are looking for an alternative. There is a demand. That's why you have so many private schools coming up. Whether they are good or bad, or whether they will produce the results, is a separate discussion. But by and large, majority of parents are desperate to find a good schooling option which they can afford and which is not there. And when they see it's not there, they pull their kids out. So the problem lies on the supply side, and the onus is on the state.
Thank you very
Thank
much. We have a lot of hands, तो आप लोग सवाल जरा succinctly phrase करिएगा. And before that, I just quickly welcome all the members who have joined us from Learners Republic. So welcome to our 18th session. It's good to have you here. Uzair, आप पूछ लें. Maruf, आप पूछ लें, and then Uzair.
Am I audible this time?
Yes, Maruf.
Okay, perfect. So I was reading this an opinion article by Dr. Aisha Razak, who is an educational consultant, and she made this point that Pakistan will be developing a national education policy in this year, hopefully by March 2021. And she was arguing that why did we make the single national curriculum before devising a national policy? So the policy should have been the first step and the curriculum should have been the second step, but we did it backwards. So could you comment on that?
Well, we always do that. In 2009, when the policy was made, the curriculum was actually developed in 2006. And since I was, at least at the back end, involved with the 2009 policy, one of the debates was exactly this. The team lead for the national education policy was the late Mr. Javed Hassan Ali. And this is what he argued. He said, if you want me to make a policy, then halt the process of curriculum right now. It's basically, it doesn't it doesn't make sense. The policy process actually started in 2017. It has somehow been delayed and overtaken by this single national curriculum. But either way, as I said, policies are something that lie on the shelves anyway in this country as far as the written documents are concerned. And what happens is a combination of political expediency, whims, and the priorities of some development partners. So while practically it will not make a difference, theoretically your concern is valid. I mean, if you do not have a policy framework, where are you bringing the curriculum from? And that's why a lot of times the curriculum is not aligned to some sort of a need-based analysis. So theoretically, I agree with it. Practically, unfortunately, things are too much of a hodgepodge to give us, for want of a better word, to give you a sensible response.
User.
Thank you. My question is, how come language is not as high of an issue in our neighboring country, where we see people focusing more or debating more about math skills than science skills, because we share a lot of attributes with them in terms of native language not being English or Urdu or Hindi.
Uzair, this is the most, I don't know what word to use. This is one area, which hurts the most. It's very, very painful to see that people sitting in high chairs have assumptions about the English language, have assumptions about our own languages, have assumptions about teachers, students, teachers, which are completely detrimental to the child. You're right. You focus on critical analytical ability. You focus on basic literacy, numeracy skills in whichever language the child gets it. The best language for it. And then you can transfer, as I said, you can transit those skills into the next one. Hamare yahan, unfortunately, people become so emotional about these things. There's some very good research done by TCF. I think somebody was mentioning it in the chat also, but I was one of the respondents in that study. And recently we went to one of the provinces, I won't name the province, which was pushing for English language medium instruction and was one of it actually became the spoiler in the whole debate in SNC, where, some individuals from TCF and other individuals tried to push their way with the minister in getting a more diverse language policy, and that province actually sabotaged it. So when TCF was going for advocacy to that province, they also asked me to join them and a couple of other colleagues. So when we went in, the secretary and the minister were very clear. कि जी जो आप कह रहे हैं ये गलत है. And one of the comments was, research is sample based. There's diversity, you don't cover everything. Now, what do you say to that? And you come out thinking that they're going to waste another 5 years, another 5 generations of children trying to teach them English, when all they need to do is teach them literacy skills in the language which is their natural endowment and develop critical analytical ability. Critical analytical ability बन जाए तो बाकी तो बच्चा खुद ही सीख जाता है. जापानी भी टेढ़ी मेढ़ी अंग्रेजी में आपको अपनी बात समझा देता है, because he's basically or she's basically developed that critical analytical ability, and then you can learn languages later also. Now, it's something that really is a bit of a mystery for me. I don't know whether it's a colonial hang-up, it's a failure to respect research, it's a failure to empathize, maybe all of these.
Thank you, Sami Saab. We'll move to Javeria. She's doing some research on education. Javeria, you can unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Thank you for your presentation. It's quite fortunate for me to attend your presentation because I'm doing a research on education in Punjab. And the question which I am exploring is basically about the link between the type of regime and the provision of equitable education opportunities in Punjab. So we have seen that normally the resources are allocated on population basis, and there is a constant disparity between South, Central and Northern Punjab. So I just want to know that, do you think that if the formula is shifted from the population-based allocation to literacy ratio allocation, then there can be some change in the educational literacy in the province. Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer it in two parts. Firstly, I think allocation of finances is always tricky. There are multiple formulas, and I think it's something that a good system will have to keep fluid and actually look at the results and then relook at it. So it's not something that you can say this will work and this will not. You have to apply, see, revisit, see where more need is. It's an ongoing process. Unfortunately, since we do not have that type of feedback mechanisms in our systems, not structured ones, once we fix a formula, we don't revisit it. Sometimes those formulas are parts of law, so it's more difficult to change them, but at least you can question them. But the second part is that, again, I think money is an overrated issue as far as education is concerned. A lot of debate around 4% of GDP, a lot of debate around, allocate more money. Allocate more money to what? Poor delivery? More money to a system which does not even understand child's need, a system that does not know what to do in the classroom, which is not cognizant of the importance of the classroom. So you see, this is similar to the accountability questions. You see, once you know what to do, then the money will bring results. And a lot of our problems can actually be solved, especially these curriculum textbooks. These issues, they can be resolved with much less money than we allocate to, school construction, missing facilities. I'm not saying they're not important, but there has to be some sort of prioritization. So if you don't know what results you're expecting from the money, or you have the wrong priorities in terms of results, then it doesn't matter what you are allocating. Not as much. I'm not saying it won't matter at all, but that becomes secondary to the actual direction of the policy and what the money is chasing.
Thank you, sir. Wajiha, and then we'll hear from Arfan or Mariam.
Thank you, Sami Saab, for this presentation. I just have like two quick questions. The first pertains to the stunting statistics that you showed in your graph and in your presentation. Basically, I wanted to ask if there has been a concerted effort to launch school meet programs in Pakistan, because that will not only begin at least to solve the stunting problem, but I feel it will also be an incentive for the majority of the population, because in my personal experience, which is not based on research, just on talking with people, most of the time their concern with regard to sending their children to school is that it's better कि वो जाके कहीं पे काम कर लें, basically child labor, and कुछ पैसे कमा लें basically, so that family को पैसे मिल जाए. My second question pertains to the fact that there are so many boards of examinations in our country. Har province mein different hai, federal board hai. Do you see any efficacy in all of this? Do you see any use in this? Because उसके फिर यही बात है कि उन boards में itself जो आपके examiners होते हैं, फिर उनकी accountability कहाँ से आती है? Because I personally know people who have paid off certain individuals and asked them to take exams for them, and they currently have MBAs, so to speak. So, I mean, do you think that solving that one problem of reducing the number of boards could potentially curb this issue? Thank you.
Okay, the first one was stunting. Stunting actually takes place in the early years of the child. And in Pakistan, a lot of it has to do with unhealthy water. So the child develops diarrhea and loses important nutrients. And if the problem continues, then by age 2, the child's stunting becomes irreversible. So it has less to do with lack of food than dirty water and unhygienic practices. There are projects going on in some of the provinces to counter this, to the targets of improving it. But your question on school meals still remains valid, because there is a malnutrition issue in schools. As I said, based on research that I have been part of, there's a study called Voice of Teachers, which is available on the net. where we interviewed more than 1,000 teachers. And one of the issues that came up was that after 30 minutes, you lose the child because the child has not had breakfast. Now, worldwide research is very mixed on the efficacy of school meals. But what they do conclude is that it depends on the jurisdiction. And I feel there are many jurisdictions in Pakistan where a school meal will be very helpful. I mean, I would support it, and I do support it. Whatever the cost factors, there are always ways of finding ways around finances. Your other question was on board of examinations. Well, okay, I can continue now, I think. So the board of examinations issue national standards which are followed by all the boards. Then it doesn't matter how many boards there are. The problem is कि हमारे यहाँ वो standards पहले तो बने नहीं, 2017 में बने, वो अभी तक किसी ने उसको implement नहीं किया, किसी को पता ही नहीं कि उसको implement कैसे करना है. And there are two sides to the problem. One side is the logistics of actually conducting an exam and the malpractices that go in. And the malpractices, at least in Punjab, I know that from the early 90s, they have reduced a lot. And that was because in the mid 90s, when Shahbaz Sharif became the chief minister, if you go back to the newspapers of the time, one of the issues that he targeted was cheating in examinations. He used to go to the centers himself. मुझे उस वक्त भी याद है, I'm no fan of Shahbaz Sharif otherwise, but मुझे याद है कि बात होती थी कि चीफ मिनिस्टर क्यों मैट्रिक के एग्जाम में जा रहा है. तो I used to say that if this is the most important exam and the most important thing about your future, and this should be the top priority of the chief minister. So to an extent, Punjab managed to curb it. Unfortunately, the problem of cheating in, I'm not very sure about KP. KP also has that issue, but Sindh and Balochistan mein issue bahut zyada hai. You know, I have data from Balochistan examination board where in the years where the government has actually become very strict, the results have gone down. So there have been efforts in the past in Balochistan also of trying to curb cheating, but they have not been sustainable. But the more important issue is the quality of the exam itself. What is it testing? If it is testing rote memory, it's not testing critical analytical ability, it has a lot of impact on how teaching takes place in the classroom. And irrespective of where a board is, they are testing memory. They are not testing critical analytical ability. The examiners are not even trained to create what we call rubrics against the taxonomy and see how you're going to give weightage. You know, it's a whole technical area about assessment and then how you test the child and then how you do model tests, how you create an item bank. You know, it's a very specialized area, and we don't have specialists in any of the boards. So irrespective, unless we specialize these boards, and in that sense, your argument can become valid. If you do not have enough experts, create two boards for the entire country and then start. The Aga Khan board is the only board which is technically a sound board. Balochistan right now is using their services and improving their own boards. Let's see what comes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sami Saab. So we'll take Arfan and then Akhri Sawal from Mariam.
थैंक यू समी साहब, आपने काफ़ी इंसाइटफुल जो इश्यूज हैं हमारे एजुकेशन के उनके ऊपर बात की. मैं एक स्टूडेंट एक्टिविस्ट होने के नाते आपसे ये पूछना चाहूँगा कि आप मुझे कुछ 3-4 पॉइंट बताएं ऐसे बड़े जो ओवरऑल हमारी एजुकेशन पॉलिसी की रिफॉर्म करने के लिए, उसको एक इनेबलिंग एनवायरनमेंट फ्राहम करने के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है, जिसके बगैर चीज़ें आगे नहीं चल सकती. जो छोटी माइक्रो इंटरवेंशन है वो बेसिकली आगे नहीं जा पाती. तो एक तो मैं ये आपसे चाहूँगा कि अगर मैं एक स्टूडेंट एक्टिविस्ट हूँ तो मुझे उस पर कंपेन करनी है स्टूडेंट स्टडीज़ में और इस तरह से, तो मुझे वो 3-4 पॉइंट्स जो हैं वो आप क्या समझते हैं कि पाकिस्तान की एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को रिफॉर्म करने के लिए ये 4 स्टेप्स बहुत ज़रूरी हैं, इसके बगैर आगे नहीं चला जा सकता. सेकेंडली मेरा एक छोटा सा कमेंट्स था जो लैंग्वेज के हवाले से था कि हम देखते हैं कि पेरेंट्स जो हैं वो भी ख़ासतौर पे जो पंजाब के अंदर काफ़ी पेरेंट्स का ये कह लें कि कॉम्प्लेक्स है लैंग्वेज का, इंग्लिश और उर्दू के हवाले से. और अपनी मदर लैंग्वेज के ऊपर बेसिकली कॉम्प्लेक्स है। तो क्या आप इसको देखते हैं कि ये पावर के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है कि जो हमारी स्टेट जिस तरह से पावर जो बेसिकली स्टेट के अंदर चीज़ें मिलती हैं, जॉब्स हैं या दूसरी चीज़ें हैं, जो फाइनेंशियल रिसोर्सेज हैं जो आप बेसिकली गेट करते हैं दूसरी लैंग्वेजेस सीख के, तो उसके साथ चीज़ें जुड़ी हुई हैं कि पेरेंट्स जो हैं वो चाहते हैं कि अगर हमारा बच्चा पढ़े तो जो 2-4 चीज़ें सीखे और फिर वो जॉब्स वगैरह करे। जब तक हम वो एसिमेट्री नहीं तोड़ेंगे स्टेट की, मतलब स्टेट में जॉब्स के लिए आपको इंग्लिश रिक्वायरमेंट है, ठीक है, तो हम एक वालिद जो है वो क्यों अपने बच्चे को प्राइमरी पंजाबी मीडियम ऑफ एजुकेशन में भेजना चाहेगा?
करेक्ट। असल में ये बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो है, लैंग्वेज बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स एरिया है, इसका पावर से भी लिंक है, इसका परसेप्शन से भी लिंक है, इसका हिस्ट्री से भी लिंक है। पंजाब के बारे में डॉक्टर तारिक रहमान की जो स्टडी है वो ये कहती है कि पंजाब में ये कॉन्सेप्ट है कि अशराफिया उर्दू बोले। सो अशराफिया के साथ उर्दू लिंक्ड है, आई डोंट नो व्हाई, ऑफ अ वेरी रिच लैंग्वेज लाइक पंजाबी। और इट हैज़ वेरी लिटिल टू डू विद अदर डायनामिक्स। मतलब उर्दू आपको आती हो या ना आती हो, इट्स अ लिंग्वा फ्रैंका, आपका कम्युनिकेशन लैंग्वेज है पाकिस्तान में। आपकी प्रैक्टिकली जो हाई एंड जॉब्स हैं विच आर एक्स नंबर विद इन द कंट्री, वो अंग्रेजी है और वो एलिटिज्म के साथ अंग्रेजी लिंक्ड है अनफॉर्चुनेटली। अगर वो सिर्फ जॉब के साथ लिंक्ड होती तो भी इतना मसला नहीं था, वो एलिटिज्म के साथ भी लिंक्ड है। और इसके ऊपर जो प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है वो ये है कि हाँ ज़रूर हम ये नहीं कहते कि अंग्रेज़ी ना सिखाएं बच्चों को, इट्स अ लैंग्वेज दैट यू हैव इन द कंट्री, उसका एडवांटेज है। मगर अंग्रेज़ी सिखाने का जो तरीका इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है वो बिल्कुल काउंटर प्रोडक्टिव है। आप पहले देखें कि बच्चे की बुनियादी ज़बान क्या है, वो बुनियादी लिटरेसी किस ज़बान में सीख सकता है बिफोर यू कैन ट्रांसलेट द चाइल्ड टू इंग्लिश। सो ये वेरी करेगा फ्रॉम इंडिविजुअल टू या सोसाइटी टू कम्युनिटी। सो जिस कम्युनिटी में जो ज़बान बोली जाती है आप शुरू वहीं से करेंगे, उसको लिटरेसी स्किल्स देंगे, उसको लिखना पढ़ना सिखाएंगे, फिर आप उसको बेशक अंग्रेज़ी में रह जाए। 12वीं जमात तक हर बच्चा मिनिमम स्टैंडर्ड्स ऑफ अंग्रेज़ी सीख सकता है अगर आप शुरू सही जगह से करें। ये बात समझाना पॉलिसी मेकर्स को, सीनियर सिविल सर्वेंट्स को कई दफ़ा बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है। जो 2-4 समझ जाते हैं वो बेचारे, उनकी आवाज़ भी डाउन हो जाती है। सो ये इट्स अ टेक्निकल प्रोसेस लैंग्वेज लर्निंग। So that's the technical part. As far as the psychological part is concerned, कि जी वो prestige है, that depends on leadership. I think over a period of time, for example, one of the problems is, अच्छा अंग्रेजी के अंदर भी जी आपका pronunciation कैसा है, आपका accent कैसा है, why should it matter? If you can, handle your job with a certain level of proficiency of English, it doesn't matter what your accent है। हम में से किसका अंग्रेजों वाला accent है, किसी का भी नहीं है। So those are psychological and political sides which, as more education comes into the system, people will resolve. But पहले लोगों को तालीम तो ठीक तरीके से दिलवा दें उन ज़बानों में जिसमें वो तालीम हासिल कर सकते हैं, और उसके साथ उसको अंग्रेजी सिखा दें। दूसरा आपका सवाल है 3 points। पहला पॉइंट ही लैंग्वेज इशू है। If we do not resolve the language issue, catering to the diversity, meeting the child where the child is, and then taking the child wherever you want to, we will never be able to achieve. हम क्यों चाहते हैं कि पहली जमात से बच्चा इतनी अच्छी अंग्रेजी बोले जितनी उसने 12वीं तक, क्योंकि वो नहीं सीखेगा। अगर आपने 12वीं तक उसको सिखा सकते हैं, आप बस 12 साल हैं, आप क्यों सोचते हैं कि 1 साल या 5 साल में सारी तालीम खत्म हो जाएगी? तो आप बस 12 साल हैं तो फिर आप 12 साल की प्लानिंग करें बच्चे की इनिशियल एंडोमेंट्स के मुताबिक। सो द फर्स्ट इशू इज लैंग्वेज। अगर लैंग्वेज का इशू हमारा सीधा हो जाए, हमारे बहुत से मसाइल हल हो जाए। दूसरा इशू इज वी नीड अ क्रिटिकल ह्यूमन रिसोर्स इन एजुकेशन ऑफ करिकुलम एक्सपर्ट्स, ऑफ असेसमेंट एक्सपर्ट्स। हायर एजुकेशन कमीशन ने बहुत सारी स्कॉलरशिप्स दी, पर उसने प्रायोरिटाइज नहीं किया। काश के वो स्कॉलरशिप्स में 50% कहते हैं उन लोगों को दी जाएंगी जो बाहर किसी अच्छी यूनिवर्सिटी से एजुकेशन रिलेटेड डिग्री लेके आएंगे। हमारे पास इस वक्त वो एक्सपर्टीज मार्केट में भी बहुत कम है। पूरे पाकिस्तान में शायद मेरा ख्याल है 5 या 10 PhD होंगे करिकुलम के। You need a critical mass. If you don't have a critical mass, it's a specialized area. आपको specialist होने चाहिए. That's the second point. And the third point is improve your teacher training institutions. जिसके लिए भी again आपको human resource चाहिए. So these are 3 things: language, enough experts in curriculum and assessments who technically understand education, and teacher training institutions.
Thank you, Sami Saab. We still have more hands, but in the interest of time, because we have to begin our second session, I will conclude the discussion right here. I know that our fellows have been asking for your session for a while now, because a lot of them are working on education, and no one could have done a more comprehensively rewarding job. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we got to learn a great deal from you. Am I allowed to share your presentation with the rest of our fellows?
I'll give you the version with the sources clearly written in the document. I'll send it to you. You can share it.
Sami sir, I just have one question जो है वो मेरा I can't raise hand, so being a co-host उस वजह से नहीं मैं कर सका. So it's a question that I've been observing a trend recently. और वो ट्रेंड ये है कि फॉर्चुनेटली और अनफॉर्चुनेटली अब जो इकोनॉमिस्ट हैं वो बहुत एजुकेशन सेक्टर में घुसते जा रहे हैं. And so many economists are doing studies on education, and then after doing one study they pretend to be education experts. So आपका क्या ख्याल है ये जो ट्रेंड है, so इसमें जो इकोनॉमिस्ट की अभी recent sort of interest है ये पहले नहीं थी. So what do you see the impact of this intervention of economists?
पिछले 20-30 सालों में पूरी दुनिया में ये प्रॉब्लम आया है. Economists, especially in developing countries policies, the economist took over. ये वर्ल्ड बैंक के अंदर से एक एजुकेशनिस्ट मुझे आज से कई साल पहले मिली थी, कुछ 6-7 साल पहले, and she was complaining that the economists have developed all these policies like EFA and other, and they've converted it into numbers. These are not numbers. These are actual children that we're dealing with, and they're learning processes. So that has done a lot of damage, not just in Pakistan but worldwide. The only exception I'll make is Faisal Bari, who's actually transited beyond an economist and has tried to understand education. वरना by and large बहुत से बड़े-बड़े नाम हैं जिन्होंने रिपोर्टें लिखी हैं, जिन्होंने बेड़ा गर्क किया है. So कभी बैठेंगे तो मैं आपको वो नाम दे भी दूंगा. So
thank you.